You watch as mediocre people around you gain influence and respect while you remain overlooked, despite your good intentions and moral character. Every day you witness those who play politics and bend rules advance rapidly, while your honest approach keeps you invisible and powerless in a world that rewards cunning over kindness. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine who spent years observing power, how it's gained, how it's lost, and why good people finish last. For over 500 years, my insights into human nature and political strategy have guided those brave enough to embrace uncomfortable truths about strength and influence. What I discovered about true power will transform how you navigate any competitive environment, showing you how to become formidable without losing your soul. The principles I'll share bridge the gap between medieval courts and modern boardrooms, where the same dynamics of power still determine who rises and who falls. But first, like this video, subscribe for more strategic wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for transformation. The year was 1498, and I stood in the Piazza della Signoria, watching a man burn. Not just any man, Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar who had held Florence in his moral grip for 4 years. The same crowds who once hung on his every word about virtue and divine justice now cheered as flames consumed his body. This moment shattered every naive belief I held about power, goodness, and human nature. I had been a young man then, barely 29, filled with republican ideals and faith in the triumph of virtue. Savonarola had seemed invincible, a moral force that even the Pope and powerful families feared. He preached against corruption, burned books and artwork in his bonfires of the vanities, and convinced the Florentines that God was on their side. I watched him transform my city through the sheer force of his convictions. But here's what I learned that day. As the smoke rose from his charred remains, moral authority without practical power is nothing more than a beautiful dream waiting to become a nightmare. Savonarola had made a fatal error. He believed that being right was enough. He thought that divine approval could substitute for political cunning. He trusted that his righteousness would protect him from the machinations of more worldly men. I watched him refuse to build alliances, alienate potential supporters, and make enemies of those who could have been valuable friends. The friar's downfall began when he challenged Pope Alexander VI directly, calling him the Antichrist. Righteous, perhaps. Strategic, absolutely not. He gave his enemies the perfect weapon to use against him, the charge of heresy. When the political winds shifted, when his prophecies failed to materialize, when Florence faced military pressure, the same people who had worshipped him turned against him with vicious speed. As I watched the flames that day, I understood something that would shape everything I would later write. Good intentions are not enough. Moral purity is not enough. Being right is not enough. In the real world, the world where actual power determines who lives and who dies, who prospers and who suffers, effectiveness matters more than righteousness. This was my awakening to the harsh mathematics of power. Savonarola died because he confused moral authority with political strength. He believed that God would protect him, not realizing that God helps those who help themselves with intelligent strategy, careful alliances, and the wisdom to know when to advance and when to retreat. That day, watching a good man burn for his noble intentions, I made a decision that would define my life's work. I would learn how power actually works, not how we wish it worked. I would study the mechanics of influence, the psychology of fear and respect, the delicate art of timing. I would become a student of reality, however uncomfortable that reality might be. The smell of that smoke never left me. 3 years later, the Florentine government sent me as an envoy to a man who would become my greatest teacher in the art of power, Cesare Borgia. I had heard the stories, of course, the Pope's son, the Duke of Valentinos, the man who conquered cities with a combination of brilliant strategy and breathtaking ruthlessness. Nothing, however, prepared me for the education I would receive in his court. I arrived at his camp near Imola in October 1502, expecting to meet a brutal tyrant. Instead, I found a man of remarkable intelligence and calculation. Cesare Borgia was dangerous, yes, but dangerous in the way a master swordsman is dangerous. Every move deliberate, every action serving a larger purpose. Watching him work was like watching an artist paint with power itself. The first lesson came immediately. While other leaders surrounded themselves with yes-men and sycophants, Borgia sought out harsh truths. He questioned me relentlessly about Florence's military capabilities, not to mock our weaknesses, but to understand exactly what kind of ally or enemy we might become. He treated information like currency, and he was always calculating the exchange rate. But it was his handling of the Orsine conspiracy that truly opened my eyes to the sophisticated nature of real power. Several of his own commanders had betrayed him, plotting with his enemies to destroy him. A lesser man might have raged, might have struck blindly, might have shown weakness through emotional reaction. Borgia did something far more dangerous. He smiled, invited his conspirators to a meeting, and then had them all killed in a single, swift action. What struck me wasn't the violence itself, but the precision of it. He eliminated exactly the threats that needed eliminating, no more, no less. He showed mercy to those who could be redeemed and ruthlessness to those who couldn't. The surviving members of his court understood the message perfectly. Loyalty was rewarded. Betrayal was eliminated. But there was always a path back to his good graces for those wise enough to choose it. I watched him combine seemingly contradictory qualities with masterful ease. He could be generous and cruel in the same day, inspiring deep loyalty while maintaining healthy fear. He understood that people need both the carrot and the stick, but more importantly, he knew exactly when to use each dot. Borgia taught me that true power requires the ability to be both loved and feared. But if you must choose one, fear is more reliable than love. Love is fickle, dependent on others' emotions and circumstances. Fear, properly applied, is consistent. But this was crucial. Fear must never become hatred. The moment people stop fearing you and start hating you, you're finished. During my months observing him, I saw how he used calculated displays of both mercy and severity to shape others' behavior. He would spare a city that surrendered quickly, then completely destroy one that resisted, ensuring that future cities would choose surrender. This wasn't random cruelty, it was strategic communication. Borgia showed me that effectiveness, not moral purity, determines who shapes the world. He was building something lasting, something that would bring order to chaos, even if his methods disturbed those with delicate sensibilities. In 1513, everything I thought I knew about my own strength was shattered in the most personal way possible. The Medici had returned to power in Florence, and I found myself accused of conspiracy against them. Within days, I went from being a respected government official to a prisoner in the Bargello, facing torture and possible execution. My crime, being too closely associated with the previous Republican government, and perhaps more dangerously, having ideals. The prison cell was small, dark, and cold. But the real torture wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the realization of how completely powerless I had become. All my good intentions, all my honest service to Florence, all my belief in Republican virtue had protected me not at all. I had been naive enough to think that doing the right thing would somehow shield me from the brutal realities of political change. They subjected me to the strappado, hanging me by my arms tied behind my back, then dropping me suddenly to dislocate my shoulders. The pain was extraordinary, but what hurt more was understanding how icily my enemies had outmaneuvered me. While I had been focused on serving the state with integrity, they had been building networks, securing loyalties, and positioning themselves for the inevitable transition of power. In those moments of agony, hanging by my tortured arms, I finally understood what Savonarola must have felt when his moral certainty crumbled against political reality. I had made the same fundamental error, believing that virtue alone could navigate the treacherous waters of power. I had been so concerned with being good that I had forgotten to be effective. The questions they asked during my interrogation revealed how thoroughly I had misunderstood the game being played around me. They wanted to know about plots and conspiracies, but the truth was that I had been too idealistic to engage in the kind of practical politics that might have protected me. I had clean hands, but clean hands don't stop the rope or the blade. During those long nights in my cell, I replayed every decision that had led me there. I had served the Republic faithfully, believing that competence and dedication would be enough. I had written honest reports, given sound advice, and worked tirelessly for what I believed was the greater good. And where had it gotten me? Thrown aside the moment power changed hands, as disposable as yesterday's bread. The irony was crushing. I had studied power, had observed it in others, had even written about it in my dispatches, but I had never truly applied those lessons to my own situation. I had remained an observer, not a player. I had confused understanding power with wielding it. My release came not through justice or mercy, but through a political calculation. Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X, and a general amnesty was declared to celebrate. I walked out of prison, not because I was innocent, but because it was politically convenient to let me go. This final humiliation completed my education. I owed my freedom not to righteousness, but to the arbitrary whims of those with real power. That experience in the Bargello broke something in me that needed to be broken. It shattered my last illusions about the protective power of good intentions. I emerged determined never again to be so vulnerable, never again to confuse moral superiority with practical strength. The world had taught me a hard lesson, and I was finally ready to be its student. After my release from prison, I retreated to my small estate outside Florence to think, to write, and to finally understand the lessons that life had beaten into me. It was there, in the quiet of my study, that I developed what would become my most important insight. Every person who wishes to be effective in this world must learn to be both lion and fox. This isn't a metaphor. It's a practical necessity. The lion represents force, directness, and the willingness to confront obstacles head-on. The fox represents cunning, adaptability, and the intelligence to find paths around obstacles that cannot be overcome through strength alone. Most people try to be one or the other, and this limitation destroys them. I learned this first from watching my own failures. During my government service, I had tried to be entirely the fox, clever, diplomatic, always seeking the elegant solution. I thought intelligence alone could navigate any challenge, but when the Medici returned with their superior force, my cleverness meant nothing. I had no lion within me, no capacity for the kind of direct action that might have protected my position. Conversely, I had watched many strong men fail because they knew only how to be the lion. They could intimidate, they could fight, they could impose their will through superior force. But when faced with challenges that required subtlety, patience, or strategic thinking, they were helpless. Brute strength has its place, but strength without cunning is mere brutality, and brutality eventually creates more enemies than it defeats. The fox teaches you to study your environment, to understand the motivations and fears of those around you, to find the indirect path to your goals. When you cannot take what you want by force, you must learn to maneuver others into giving it to you willingly. This requires understanding human nature, reading the subtle signs of ambition and fear, and positioning yourself so that helping you serves others' interests. But the fox alone is vulnerable. There are times when direct action is not just preferable but necessary. When someone threatens you directly, when delay serves your enemy's purposes, when others test your resolve through small aggressions, these moments require the lion. You must be capable of swift, decisive action that demonstrates both your power and your willingness to use it. The key is knowing when to be which animal. Early in any relationship or conflict, display the fox. Be charming, be useful, be the person others want to have around. Let them underestimate your capacity for force while you gather information and build advantages. But when the moment comes for direct action, transform completely. Be swift, be overwhelming, be unmistakably powerful. I saw this principle perfectly demonstrated in Cesare Borgia's handling of Ramiro de Orco, his brutal lieutenant in Romagna. Borgia needed to pacify a lawless region, so he sent Ramiro to establish order through harsh methods. When order was achieved, Borgia had Ramiro publicly executed, satisfying the people's desire for justice while demonstrating his own power. Fox-like cunning in using Ramiro's brutality, then lion-like decisiveness in eliminating him when he became a liability. Most people feared this duality, thinking it makes them dishonest or manipulative. They want to be consistent, to always act from the same set of principles. This moral squeamishness is a luxury you cannot afford if you want to be effective. The world doesn't care about your desire for moral simplicity. Responds to results. Learn to cultivate both aspects of your nature. Develop your intellectual cunning, your ability to read situations and people, your capacity for patient, indirect approaches to problems, but also develop your capacity for direct action, your willingness to confront challenges head-on when cunning isn't sufficient, your ability to project strength when strength is what the situation demands. The person who masters both becomes truly dangerous, not because they're evil, but because they're unpredictable and adaptable. Their enemies never know whether they're facing the charming fox or the fierce lion until it's too late to adjust their strategy. One of the most dangerous questions any leader faces is this: is it better to be loved or feared? Most people answer loved without thinking, because it sounds more noble, more human. This instinctive response reveals exactly why most people never achieve real influence. They're optimizing for their own comfort rather than for effectiveness. I learned the hard truth about this choice through careful observation of both successful and failed leaders. Love is wonderful when you have it, but it's unreliable, conditional, and often temporary. People love you when you're useful to them, when you make them feel good, when your interests align with theirs. But love evaporates the moment circumstances change, the moment you must ask them to sacrifice for the greater good, the moment you must make difficult decisions that serve long-term interests over short-term comfort. Fear, properly applied, is far more dependable. When people fear you, they consider the consequences of crossing you before they act. They think twice before betraying your trust, before undermining your authority, before choosing their immediate desires over your directives. Fear creates space between impulse and action, space where rational calculation can occur. But here's the crucial distinction that separates effective leaders from tyrants. You want to be feared, not hated. Hatred is fear's dangerous cousin, and it will destroy you. When people hate you, they will risk everything to see you fall. They will sacrifice their own interests, endure personal pain, and make irrational decisions just to hurt you. Hatred makes people dangerous in ways that fear does not. The secret is creating what I call respectful fear, a combination of respect for your capabilities and fear of disappointing you. This happens when people understand that you are powerful enough to help or hurt them, but fair enough that your decisions follow consistent principles rather than arbitrary whims. I observed this delicate balance in Lorenzo de' Medici, who ruled Florence for decades. People feared his power. They knew he could destroy their businesses, their reputations, their families if they crossed him. But they also saw that he used his power strategically, not vindictively. He rewarded loyalty generously and punished betrayal swiftly. But he didn't punish people for honest mistakes or for pursuing their legitimate interests in ways that didn't threaten him. The key to maintaining this balance is consistency. People must be able to predict the consequences of their actions based on your previous responses. When they know that loyalty brings rewards and betrayal brings punishment, they can make rational calculations about how to behave around you. Unpredictable leaders create anxiety, which can easily turn into resentment and hatred. Never confuse being feared with being a monster. The goal isn't to terrorize people into submission. Terrorize people are unreliable and will turn on you the moment they see weakness. The goal is to be respected as someone who has both the power and the will to enforce consequences for actions that threaten your interests or those you're responsible for protecting. Love is a luxury that leaders can sometimes afford, but fear is a necessity they can never do without. If you must choose between them, choose fear, but choose it wisely. Deploy it strategically, and never let it curdle into hatred. The person who can inspire respectful fear while maintaining the possibility of earning genuine loyalty possesses one of the most powerful combinations in human relations. Remember, people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel powerful or powerless in your presence. The most successful people I've observed understand a truth that destroys the naive. Appearing virtuous is more important than being virtuous. This statement shocks those who still believe the world operates according to moral principles rather than practical ones, but it's a reality that every effective person must master. I don't advocate abandoning virtue, advocate understanding that virtue without the appearance of virtue is useless, while the appearance of virtue without actual virtue can be incredibly powerful. The world judges you based on what it sees, not on what you actually are. Master the art of managing perceptions, and you master a fundamental lever of power. During my time observing the papal court, I watched masters of this principle in action. These were men who could appear pious while engaging in the most worldly pursuits, who could seem humble while accumulating vast power, who could project compassion while making ruthlessly calculated decisions. They understood that people want to believe their leaders are virtuous, so they gave people exactly what they wanted to see. The mask of virtue serves several strategic purposes. First, it allows you to operate without constant moral scrutiny. When people believe you're fundamentally good, they interpret your actions charitably. They assume your motives are pure, even when your methods are questionable. This benefit of the doubt is incredibly valuable, gives you space to maneuver that others don't possess. Second, appearing virtuous attracts allies and supporters. People want to associate with those they perceive as morally superior. They feel better about themselves when they're connected to someone who seems to embody the qualities they admire. This makes recruitment easier and opposition more difficult. Who wants to attack someone who appears virtuous? But here's the sophisticated part. The mask must be genuine enough to be believable. You can't simply pretend to be good while being obviously calculating. The most effective approach is to actually embrace certain virtues, particularly those that serve your strategic interests, while being pragmatic about others when circumstances require it. I learned this during my own diplomatic career. When representing Florence, I found that appearing completely honest and straightforward made my negotiations more effective. Foreign leaders trusted me because I seemed incapable of sophisticated deception. This appearance of virtue wasn't entirely false. I was honest about many things, but it gave me cover for the selective truths and strategic omissions that any effective diplomacy requires. The key is understanding which virtues to display prominently and which to practice privately. Public generosity, for instance, builds reputation, and creates obligation in others. Private generosity might make you feel good, but it serves no strategic purpose. Public justice demonstrates that you can be fair, which encourages people to work with you. Private justice might satisfy your conscience, but it doesn't build your influence. Learn to be selectively transparent. Share information about your virtuous actions while keeping your more pragmatic decisions private. Let people discover evidence of your goodness rather than proclaiming it directly discovered. Virtue seems more authentic than advertised virtue. This isn't about becoming a hypocrite or abandoning your moral center. It's about understanding that effectiveness requires managing how others perceive you, and that pure authenticity is often The person who insists on displaying all their qualities equally, including their willingness to be ruthless when necessary, will be treated as dangerous and face unnecessary resistance. The most dangerous people I've known appeared completely harmless. They seemed kind, reasonable, and trustworthy right up until the moment they struck. Their mask of virtue wasn't fake, it reflected real aspects of their character, but it concealed capabilities that their enemies discovered too late. Master this principle. Be virtuous enough that your mask has genuine substance, but strategic enough that your virtue serves your larger purposes rather than constraining them. Most people wait for others to act against them before responding. They believe this makes them moral, reasonable, or fair. In reality, it makes them victims. By the time your enemies have moved against you openly, they've already gained significant advantages. They've chosen the timing, the battlefield, and the terms of engagement. You're fighting their fight on their schedule, and that's usually a losing proposition. I learned this lesson painfully during the conspiracy against Piero Soderini's government. We saw the signs, the Medici building support, gathering resources, making alliances with foreign powers. We knew they intended to return to Florence and overthrow the Republic, but we did nothing decisive to prevent it, because we wanted to appear reasonable, because we hoped the threat would somehow dissipate, because taking preemptive action seemed aggressive. The result, when they finally moved, we were unprepared. They had coordinated with Spanish forces, secured papal support, and neutralized potential opposition. By waiting for them to make the first move, we had allowed them to choose the perfect moment to strike. We lost everything because we were too civilized to act on our knowledge of their intentions. The Romans understood this principle instinctively. When they identified a potential threat, they didn't wait for it to mature. They acted while they still held the advantage. This isn't because they were naturally aggressive, but because they understood that allowing enemies to grow stronger while you remain passive is strategic suicide. Striking first doesn't mean being randomly aggressive or attacking innocent people. It means identifying genuine threats early and neutralizing them before they can harm you. The key word is genuine. You must be able to distinguish between actual threats and mere competition. Real threats are situations where someone's success necessarily requires your failure, where compromise is impossible, where their interests directly conflict with your survival or essential goals. The art of preemptive action requires excellent intelligence gathering. You must understand not just what people are doing, but what they're planning to do. This means watching for patterns, who they're meeting with, what resources they're accumulating, how they're positioning themselves relative to you. Most threats announce themselves long before they strike, but only to those who know how to read. The sign's timing is crucial. Strike too early, and you appear paranoid or aggressive, potentially creating enemies where none existed. Strike too late, and you're simply reacting to their initiative. The perfect moment is when you have clear evidence of hostile intent but before they've completed their preparations. This gives you the moral cover of self-defense, while preserving the strategic advantage of initiative. I observed this principle perfectly executed by Pope Julius II. In his campaign against the Bentivoglio family in Bologna, he didn't wait for them to rebel against papal authority, he saw their growing independence as an inevitable challenge to his power, and acted while he could still count on surprise. By moving first, he removed a potential threat before it became an actual crisis. The psychological impact of striking first extends far beyond the immediate conflict. When people see that you're willing and able to act preemptively against threats, they're much less likely to threaten you in the first place. Your reputation for decisive action becomes a deterrent that prevents conflicts before they start. However, preemptive action must be followed by strategic communication. You must be able to explain your actions in terms that others can understand and accept. The narrative matters. You're not the aggressor. You're someone who recognized a threat and acted responsibly to protect yourself and those depending on you. The person who masters preemptive action while maintaining moral legitimacy possesses one of the most powerful strategic capabilities. They shape events rather than merely responding to them. They choose the timing and terms of their conflicts, and they deter future threats through their reputation for intelligent decisiveness. Remember, in a world where others are planning your downfall, waiting for them to make the first move isn't virtue, it's weakness disguised as principle. No one achieves significant power alone. Even the strongest leaders depend on networks of relationships, formal and informal alliances, and strategic partnerships. But most people misunderstand the nature of these relationships, treating them like friendships when they should be treating them like business arrangements. This confusion weakens them and often leads to bitter disappointment. I learned the hard way that emotional bonds and strategic partnerships are different creatures entirely. During my government service, I often confused personal affection with political reliability. I trusted people because I liked them, supported initiatives because they seemed morally right, and expected loyalty based on past friendship. These mistakes cost me dearly when political circumstances changed and my friends abandoned me for their own interests. True alliances are built on mutual benefit, not mutual affection. The strongest partnerships occur when helping you serves the other person's interests, not when they like you as a person. This might sound cold, but it's far more reliable than relationships based on emotion alone. Emotions change, circumstances change, but self-interest is a constant you can count on. The key to building powerful alliances is making yourself genuinely valuable to others. This means developing capabilities, resources, or connections that others need but cannot easily obtain elsewhere. The more unique your value proposition, the more people will want to maintain good relationships with you, regardless of their personal feelings. I observed this principle masterfully executed in the various Italian city-states' shifting alliances. During the Italian Wars, Venice, Milan, Florence, and other powers constantly realigned their partnerships based on changing strategic needs. They understood that yesterday's enemy might be tomorrow's ally if circumstances shifted, and that permanent friendships in politics are usually permanent weaknesses. The art of alliance building requires several sophisticated skills. First, you must accurately assess what others truly want, not what they say they want, but what they actually prioritize when forced to choose. Many people don't even understand their own deepest motivations, so this requires careful observation of their actions rather than mere listening to their words. Second, you must be able to communicate how helping you serves their interests. This isn't about manipulation, it's about finding genuine areas where your success enables their success. The best alliances are those where both parties profit from the relationship, making betrayal economically irrational. Third, you must maintain multiple relationships simultaneously without creating conflicts of interest. This requires compartmentalization and careful management of information. Your alliance with one person shouldn't automatically make you an enemy of their enemies, unless you've consciously chosen to take that risk for strategic reasons. The The strongest position is to be valuable to multiple parties who don't necessarily like each other. This gives you options and leverage if one relationship sours, you have alternatives. It also makes you too useful to eliminate, since removing you would benefit your other allies at the expense of whoever might consider moving against you. But alliances require maintenance, regular communication, occasional favors, and consistent reliability build the trust that makes partnerships durable. You don't have to be friends with your allies, but you must be someone they can count on to honor your agreements and protect their interests. When they align with yours, know when to form alliances and when to break them. The former is obvious when you need resources, capabilities, or support that you lack. The latter is more delicate but equally important. When an alliance no longer serves your interests, when your partner becomes a liability, or when circumstances create better opportunities elsewhere, you must be prepared to end the relationship diplomatically. The most sophisticated operators maintain what I call alliance portfolios, diverse networks of relationships that serve different purposes and provide multiple pathways to their goals. They're not dependent on any single partnership, which gives them the freedom to be selective and the leverage to negotiate better terms. Master this principle. Treat alliances as strategic tools, not emotional commitments. Build them on mutual benefit, maintain them through consistent value delivery, and modify them when circumstances change. The person who can build and manage powerful alliance networks multiplies their capabilities far beyond what they could achieve alone. In every conflict I observed, the victor was usually the person with better information, not necessarily the person with more obvious strengths. Knowledge of others' weaknesses, plans, fears, and desires is more valuable than gold or armies. Information tells you when to attack, when to retreat, when to form alliances, and when to betray them. Without good intelligence, you're fighting blind. I learned this during my diplomatic missions, where success depended entirely on understanding what the other parties really wanted beneath their stated positions. Formal negotiations were theater. The real work happened in private conversations, casual observations, and careful analysis of what people revealed when they thought no one important was listening. The first lesson is that everyone has secrets they desperately want to keep hidden. These secrets are pressure points, weaknesses you can exploit if necessary, or leverage you can use to influence their behavior. The secret might be a shameful action from their past, a current vulnerability in their position, or a desire they can't acknowledge publicly. Find these secrets, and you hold power over that person. But gathering information isn't just about discovering embarrassing details. It's about understanding the complete picture of someone's situation, their real motivations, their actual capabilities, their genuine fears, their hidden alliances, and their long-term plans. Most people operate based on incomplete information about others, which makes them predictable to those who see the full picture. During my time in various courts, I developed what I called my intelligence network, not spies in the dramatic sense, but simply people who talked to me, servants, junior officials, merchants, priests, anyone who moved through different social circles and observed things that important people missed. These sources weren't necessarily loyal to me. They just enjoyed feeling important by sharing information they thought might be valuable. The key to building an information network is making people want to tell you things. This requires being someone others trust, someone who seems genuinely interested in their observations, and someone who occasionally provides valuable information in return. People love to feel like insiders, like they possess knowledge that others lack. Feed this desire, and they'll keep feeding you information. Learn to ask questions that don't seem like interrogation. Instead of directly asking what you want to know, Create conversations where the information emerges naturally. Ask about seemingly unrelated topics that reveal the details you actually need. Show interest in people's opinions and observations. People are flattered when someone appears to value their insights. Pay attention to patterns rather than isolated facts. One piece of information might be meaningless, but several pieces that point in the same direction reveal important truths. I learned to map people's relationships, track their movements, and note changes in their behavior. These patterns often revealed plans and intentions long before they became obvious to others. Protect your own information while gathering theirs. Share carefully selected truths that make you seem open and honest while concealing anything that could be used against you. Create compartments in your relationships. Different people should know different aspects of your situation, making it difficult for anyone to assemble a complete picture of your capabilities or plans. The timing of information is crucial. Sometimes, the same piece of information is worthless if revealed too early or too late. I learned to gather intelligence continuously but deploy it strategically, waiting for the moment when it would have maximum impact. This might mean holding on to damaging information about an enemy until they're vulnerable, or sharing valuable intelligence with an ally exactly when they need it most. Remember that information is power only if you're willing to use it. Some people gather secrets but never leverage them, either from moral squeamishness or fear of consequences. This makes their intelligence gathering pointless. The threat of revealing information is often more powerful than actually revealing it, but only if others believe you would actually follow through. The most sophisticated operators create what I call information asymmetries, situations where they know significantly more about others than others know about them. This imbalance creates enormous strategic advantages, allowing them to predict others' actions, avoid traps, and exploit opportunities that less informed competitors miss. Master this principle. Treat information as your most valuable resource. Gather it systematically, protect your own ruthlessly, and deploy it strategically when the timing serves your purposes. Fortune, I have observed, is like a woman. She favors the bold who seize the moment rather than those who hesitate and deliberate endlessly. But boldness without timing is mere recklessness, and timing without preparation is mere wishful thinking. The art of power lies in recognizing when circumstances align in your favor and acting decisively before the window closes. Throughout my career, I watched brilliant people fail because they couldn't read the signs that indicated when action would succeed and when it would fail. They had good strategies, adequate resources, and sound reasoning, but they moved at the wrong moment, too early when resistance was strong, or too late when opportunities had passed to others more alert to changing conditions. The key insight is that most situations have natural rhythms, periods when change is possible and periods when the status quo is locked in place. These rhythms are created by external pressures, internal tensions, and the convergence of multiple factors that make transformation either easier or harder. Learn to read these rhythms, and you can accomplish with minimal effort what would be impossible at other times. I learned this during the constant political upheavals in Florence. There were moments when the entire political structure was vulnerable to change, when foreign armies approached, when economic crises created desperation, when scandals weakened established leaders. During these windows, a relatively small force could redirect the entire trajectory of the city. But between these windows, the same amount of effort would accomplish nothing. The Romans mastered this principle in their expansion across the Mediterranean. They didn't attack every enemy immediately or try to conquer everyone simultaneously. Instead, they waited for the right moments when their enemies were distracted by other conflicts, when internal divisions weakened their opponents, when natural disasters or political crises created opportunities for intervention. Preparation is what allows you to capitalize on timing. You must be ready to move before the opportunity appears, because opportunities rarely wait for you to get organized. This means developing your capabilities during quiet periods, building relationships before you need them, gathering resources when they're abundant rather than waiting until they're scarce. Watch for the signs that indicate approaching opportunities. These include external pressures that destabilize existing arrangements, internal conflicts within organizations or relationships that create openings for new players, changes in technology or circumstances that make old approaches obsolete, and moments when powerful people are distracted or vulnerable. Equally important is recognizing when timing works against you. Sometimes the wisest action is patience, waiting for circumstances to shift, rather than forcing action when conditions are unfavorable. This requires the discipline to resist premature moves, even when you're eager to advance your interests. I observed this patience in Pope Julius II's approach to reclaiming papal territories. He could have attempted to reconquer everything at once, but instead he waited for the right moments to move against each target. He struck at Bologna when Venice was distracted elsewhere, moved against other territories when France was preoccupied with other wars, and timed his actions to maximize his chances while minimizing coordinated resistance. The most sophisticated operators create their own timing by manipulating circumstances to align in their favor. They don't just wait for natural opportunities. They engineer situations that force others to act on their schedule rather than their own. This might involve creating artificial deadlines, introducing new pressures, or removing supports that maintain the current balance. But never mistake timing for everything. Even perfect timing cannot overcome fundamental weaknesses in strategy, preparation, or execution. Timing multiplies your existing strengths. It doesn't create strengths you lack. The person who combines good preparation with excellent timing becomes nearly unstoppable, while those who rely on timing alone often find themselves exposed when quick action is required. Learn to distinguish between opportunities that require immediate action and those that allow for careful preparation. Some windows stay open long, enough for you to optimize your approach, while others slam shut if you hesitate for even a moment. Develop the judgment to recognize the difference, and you'll avoid both premature moves and missed chances. Master this principle. Prepare continuously, watch constantly, and when the moment arrives, act with complete decisiveness. Fortune favors those who are ready when she offers her gifts. One of the most powerful weapons in your arsenal is the ability to be strategically unpredictable. When others cannot anticipate your moves, they cannot prepare effective countermeasures. They must spread their defenses thin, react to your initiatives rather than pursuing their own plans, and operate from a position of constant uncertainty that wears down their confidence and effectiveness. But there's a crucial distinction between controlled unpredictability and random chaos. Random behavior makes you seem unstable and unreliable, traits that drive away allies and opportunities. Controlled unpredictability means being consistent in your core principles while varying your methods, timing, and specific responses in ways that keep others off balance. I learned this principle by observing Cesare Borgia's psychological warfare against his enemies. They never knew when he would be diplomatic and when he would be ruthless, when he would honor agreements and when he would break them, when he would be patient and when he would strike swiftly. This uncertainty paralyzed his opponents. They couldn't commit fully to any strategy because they couldn't predict his responses. The foundation of controlled unpredictability is having multiple options for achieving your goals. If others know you have only one way to get what you want, they can focus their defenses on blocking that single path. But if you can approach your objectives through several different routes, they must guard against all possibilities, weakening their position at every point. Vary your patterns deliberately. If you always respond to challenges the same way, Others learn to manipulate you by creating situations that trigger predictable responses. Sometimes be aggressive when they expect diplomacy. Sometimes be patient when they expect quick action. Sometimes be generous when they expect you to be calculating. This variability makes you much harder to manage or control. However, maintain consistency in areas where reliability serves your interests. Your word should be dependable when you give formal commitments. Your principles should be clear so people understand what motivates you. And your reactions to certain behaviors should be predictable enough that others can learn from them. The goal is selective unpredictability, not universal chaos. I observed this balance in the successful merchants of Venice, who were absolutely reliable in their business dealings. Their word was their bond in commercial matters, but completely unpredictable in their political alliances. This combination made them valuable trading partners, while making them impossible to control politically. Use timing as a tool of unpredictability. Sometimes move quickly when others expect lengthy deliberation. Sometimes take time when they expect immediate action. This temporal uncertainty forces others to maintain constant vigilance, which is exhausting and expensive. They never know when they need to be ready for your next move. Communicate in ways that preserve ambiguity when it serves you. Give responses that can be interpreted multiple ways. Make statements that commit you to general directions without specifying exact methods. And ask questions that reveal others' assumptions while concealing your own intentions. This isn't about lying, it's about controlling the flow and precision of information. The most effective practitioners of this principle appear completely reasonable and straightforward, while actually being quite difficult to read. They answer questions honestly but incompletely. They fulfill commitments precisely but minimally. And they respond to situations appropriately but not necessarily as expected. This makes them seem trustworthy while maintaining strategic flexibility. Change your operational patterns regularly. If you usually communicate through certain channels, occasionally use different ones. If you typically involve certain people in decisions, sometimes make choices independently. If you normally take time to consider options, occasionally act swiftly on instinct. These variations prevent others from building accurate models of your decision-making process, but never be unpredictable simply for its own sake. Every variation from expected patterns should serve a strategic purpose, confusing specific opponents, testing reactions, exploring new possibilities, or maintaining your reputation for being difficult to predict. Pointless unpredictability wastes the element of surprise and makes you seem arbitrary rather than strategic. The ultimate goal is to train others to expect the unexpected from you, while still maintaining their confidence in your basic competence and reliability. They should know that working with you will produce results, but they should never be certain exactly how those results will be achieved or when they will appear. Master this principle. Be predictable enough to inspire confidence, unpredictable enough to maintain advantage, and strategic enough to ensure that your unpredictability serves your larger purposes rather than undermining them. Nothing destroys more promising leaders than misplaced mercy. They spare enemies who should be eliminated, forgive betrayals that should be punished, and show kindness to those who interpret it as weakness. This excessive clemency doesn't make them virtuous, it makes them victims of their own good intentions. I learned this bitter lesson through observation and personal experience. During the Republican period in Florence, we repeatedly showed mercy. 2 conspirators forgave those who worked against us, and tried to win over enemies through generosity rather than eliminating them. Every act of mercy was seen not as magnanimity, but as proof that we lacked the will to defend ourselves effectively. The fundamental error is believing that mercy creates gratitude and loyalty. In reality, people you spare often resent you more than strangers do, because your mercy reminds them of their vulnerability and dependence. They know you could have destroyed them and chose not to, which makes them feel simultaneously grateful and humiliated. This psychological tension usually resolves in favor of resentment rather than loyalty. Mercy also sends a dangerous message to others who might consider opposing you. When they see that betrayal and opposition carry minimal consequences, they calculate that the potential rewards of challenging you outweigh the likely risks. Your reputation for clemency becomes an invitation for others to test your resolve. The Romans understood this principle instinctively. When they conquered territories, they offered clear choices: submit completely and be treated well, or resist and face total destruction. They showed mercy to those who surrendered quickly and utter ruthlessness to those who forced them to fight. This combination taught others that cooperation brought benefits while resistance brought catastrophe. But the alternative to misplaced mercy isn't random cruelty, it's strategic severity. Every punishment should serve a purpose, deterring others from similar actions, demonstrating your resolve, or removing threats that cannot be reformed. Severity without purpose is mere brutality, which creates hatred and eventual resistance. The key is distinguishing between enemies who can be redeemed and those who cannot. Some people oppose you due to misunderstanding, conflicting short-term interests, or loyalty to competing leaders. These opponents might become allies under different circumstances, but others oppose you due to fundamental incompatibility, personal animosity, or zero-sum competition for the same resources. These enemies will never be trustworthy allies, regardless of how well you treat them. I observed this distinction in Cesare Borgia's handling of conquered territories. He was capable of remarkable generosity toward those who accepted his authority genuinely, but utterly ruthless toward those who continued plotting against him. After their defeat, he understood that treating these two categories the same way, either mercifully or harshly, would be strategically foolish. When you must show severity, do it completely and publicly. Half measures in punishment are worse than no punishment at all, because they create martyrs without eliminating threats. If someone's actions require correction, the response should be severe enough to deter repetition and clear enough to communicate your standards to others watching. However, leave room for redemption when possible. The goal isn't to destroy everyone who opposes you, but to establish that opposition carries real costs, while submission brings real benefits. Some of your most valuable allies will be former enemies who learned to respect your power and fairness after experiencing both your severity and your capacity for forgiveness. When they changed their behavior, the timing of mercy matters as much as its application. Showing mercy immediately after victory can seem like weakness, while showing it later after your power is established and your resolve proven can seem like magnanimity. The same action, interpreted as weakness in one context, becomes a demonstration of confidence in another. Never allow others to mistake your mercy for inability to be harsh when necessary. Occasionally remind people of your capacity for severity, even if you prefer not to use it. The threat of punishment is often more effective than punishment itself, but only if others believe the threat is credible. The most sophisticated approach is to be known for both mercy and severity. Mercy, those who respect your authority and serve your interests. Severity toward those who threaten or betray you. This combination attracts cooperation while deterring opposition, creating the optimal balance between appearing humane and maintaining effective control. Master this principle. Show mercy strategically, not sentimentally. Use it to build loyalty among those who can be trusted, but never allow it to be interpreted as weakness by those who would exploit your kindness for their own advantage. Your reputation is your most valuable asset and your most vulnerable weakness. It determines who will work with you, who will oppose you, what opportunities will be offered to you, and what resistance you'll face. Most people treat reputation as something that happens to them, rather than something they actively construct and defend. This passive approach guarantees that others will define you according to their interests rather than yours. I learned the power of reputation during my diplomatic career, when my effectiveness depended entirely on how foreign leaders perceived me and, through me, Florence itself. A reputation for honesty made negotiations easier because others trusted my word. A reputation for intelligence made my opinions valuable because others sought my insights. But I also learned how quickly reputation can be destroyed and how difficult it is to rebuild once damaged. The foundation of building a strong reputation is consistency between your public image and your actual capabilities. If you appear more capable than you are, reality will eventually expose the gap and destroy your credibility. If you appear less capable than you are, you'll be underestimated and passed over for opportunities. The goal is accurate representation that serves your strategic interests. Identify the specific qualities you want to be known for, then systematically demonstrate those qualities through your actions. If you want to be seen as reliable, never miss deadlines or break commitments. If you want to be seen as intelligent, share insights that prove valuable to others. If you want to be seen as powerful, occasionally demonstrate your ability to help or hurt those around you. But reputation isn't just about positive qualities, it's about being known for the right combination of strengths and limitations. Being seen as completely virtuous makes you appear naive and exploitable. Being seen as completely ruthless makes you appear dangerous and untrustworthy. The most effective reputation combines admirable qualities with just enough edge to command respect, rather than mere affection. I observed this balance in successful leaders throughout Italy. They were known for keeping their word in business dealings, but also for being formidable opponents when crossed. They had reputations for fairness, but also for decisiveness when tough choices were required. This combination attracted allies, while deterring enemies. People wanted to work with them, but didn't want to work against them. Control the narrative about your successes and failures. When you succeed, ensure that others understand your role in creating that success. When you fail, control the interpretation of what went wrong. Sometimes it's better to accept responsibility for failures that weren't entirely your fault, if doing so reinforces your reputation for integrity and accountability. Defend your reputation more aggressively than you defend your possessions. Physical assets can be replaced, but reputation, once destroyed, may be impossible to rebuild. This means responding quickly to attacks on your character, correcting false information before it spreads, and occasionally making examples of those who spread damaging lies about you. However, choose your reputation battles carefully. Not every criticism deserves a response, and sometimes responding to minor attacks gives them more attention than they would have received otherwise. Learn to distinguish between criticisms that threaten your essential reputation and those that are merely annoying or temporary. Build your reputation through third parties when possible. Praise from others is more credible than self-promotion, and criticism from enemies can actually enhance your reputation if it confirms qualities you want to be known for. When your enemies attack you for being too effective or too strategic, they're inadvertently advertising capabilities that others might find valuable. The most sophisticated reputation management involves creating multiple, consistent images for different audiences. Your reputation among allies should emphasize your loyalty and reliability. Your reputation among competitors should emphasize your competence and resolve. Your reputation among potential partners should emphasize your value and trustworthiness. These aren't contradictory images, they're different aspects of the same strategic identity. Invest in your reputation during good times, so you have credibility during bad times. When things are going well, build goodwill, demonstrate competence, and establish patterns that will serve you when circumstances become more challenging. A strong reputation provides protection during crises and accelerates recovery from setbacks. Remember that reputation has momentum. It becomes easier to maintain the reputation you have than to change it dramatically. This means getting the foundation right early, because course corrections become increasingly expensive over time. But it also means that a well-established positive reputation provides protection against temporary mistakes or failures. The person who masters reputation management possesses a force multiplier that enhances every other aspect of their strategy. Their reputation opens doors, smooths negotiations, attracts valuable people, and provides the benefit of the doubt during uncertain situations. Master this principle. Build your reputation deliberately, defend it strategically, and use it consciously as one of your most powerful tools for achieving your objectives. The people closest to you determine the quality of your decisions, the accuracy of your information, and ultimately the success or failure of your endeavors. Yet most people choose their inner circle based on comfort, familiarity, or emotional attachment rather than strategic value. This mistake has destroyed more leaders than external enemies ever could. I learned this lesson by observing the catastrophic effects of poor advisors throughout Renaissance Italy. Princes surrounded themselves with flatterers who told them what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to know. They kept relatives in important positions despite their incompetence, maintained friendships that had outlived their usefulness, and trusted people based on loyalty rather than capability. Your inner circle serves several critical functions that cannot be delegated or ignored. They provide you with information about situations you cannot observe directly. They execute decisions that require your authority but not your personal attention. They represent your interests when you cannot be present. They serve as your thinking partners for complex problems that benefit from multiple perspectives. Each of these functions requires different qualities, and few people excel at all of them. The person who gathers excellent intelligence might be terrible at execution. The one who represents you well in public might be useless for private strategic thinking. Build your inner circle with this functional diversity in mind, rather than looking for people who are generally impressive. The most dangerous type of advisor is the one who agrees with everything you say. These people feel comfortable to be around because they never challenge your thinking or make you question your assumptions. But they're worse than useless. They reinforce your existing biases and blind spots, making you more confident in flawed reasoning. Seek out people who will disagree with you when they think you're wrong. However, there's a crucial difference between advisors who disagree constructively and those who oppose you habitually. Constructive disagreement comes from people who share your fundamental goals but question your methods, timing, or analysis. Habitual opposition comes from people who disagree with your goals themselves or who enjoy conflict for its own sake. Surround yourself with the former while avoiding the latter. I observed this principle perfectly applied in the Venetian system of government, where decisions required consensus among people with different perspectives and interests. This forced decision-makers to consider multiple viewpoints before acting, leading to more thoughtful and sustainable policies. The system was slower than autocratic decision-making, but it was also more resistant to catastrophic errors. Test your advisors' judgment through small decisions before trusting them with large ones. Give them problems to solve that don't have major consequences if they fail, and observe not just their solutions but their reasoning process. The advisor who reaches the right conclusion through flawed thinking is less valuable than one who uses sound reasoning even if their specific recommendation proves wrong. Maintain some distance even from your closest advisors. They should understand that their access to you is conditional on their continued value, not guaranteed by past relationships or personal affection. This isn't cruelty, it's necessary for maintaining the quality of advice and preventing the Complacency that destroys effective advisory relationships. Rotate your advisors periodically to prevent them from becoming too comfortable or too influential. People who serve in advisory roles for too long often begin to believe they understand your interests better than you do. They start making decisions based on what they think you should want, rather than what you actually want. Fresh perspectives prevent this institutional capture of your decision-making process. Never allow your inner circle to become isolated from external reality. Advisors who spend all their time with you and each other develop shared assumptions that may not reflect the actual situation you're operating in. Ensure that your advisors maintain independent relationships and information sources that keep them grounded in broader realities. The composition of your inner circle sends powerful signals to everyone watching your rise to power. People judge your judgment based on whom you choose to trust. Competent advisors enhance your reputation for sound decision-making. Incompetent ones suggest that you lack the discernment necessary for effective leadership. Build redundancy into your advisory system so that you're not dependent on any single person's judgment or information. The advisor who becomes indispensable becomes dangerous. They can manipulate you by controlling your access to alternatives. Multiple sources of advice and information keep any single advisor honest and give you options if relationships deteriorate. Most sophisticated leaders maintain what I call advisory portfolios, different advisors for different types of decisions, with some overlap to provide checks and balances. They have advisors for short-term tactical decisions and others for long-term strategic thinking. They have advisors who understand their internal operations and others who understand external environments. Master this principle. Choose your inner circle for strategic value rather than personal comfort. Test their judgment continuously and maintain the independence necessary to make your own decisions even when they disagree with your advisors. Recommendations. The graveyards of history are filled with people who were too rigid to change when circumstances demanded adaptation. They clung to principles that had served them well in the past, even when those same principles became liabilities in new situations. They confused consistency with strength, not realizing that true strength lies in the ability to evolve while maintaining your essential identity. I learned this lesson through the repeated upheavals that characterized my lifetime in Florence. The political landscape changed constantly. Republics became principalities. Foreign powers invaded and withdrew. Alliances shifted with bewildering speed. Those who survived and thrived were not necessarily the strongest or most virtuous, but those who could read changing circumstances and adjust their approach accordingly. The key insight is that principles and tactics operate at different levels. Your fundamental goals, what you're ultimately trying to achieve, should remain relatively stable, but your methods for achieving those goals must be flexible enough to work under different conditions. The person who adapts their tactics while maintaining their strategic direction possesses optimal survivability. During my diplomatic career, I watched the various Italian powers struggle with this balance. Some, like Venice, showed remarkable adaptabilities, switching from land-based to sea-based power, from military conquest to commercial dominance, always finding new ways to maintain their independence and prosperity. Others, like many of the smaller principalities, maintained traditional approaches long after they had become obsolete and paid the price in conquest or irrelevance. Adaptation requires honest assessment of changing realities rather than wishful thinking about what you prefer those realities to be. Many leaders fail because they refuse to acknowledge that their environment has changed in ways that make their current approach ineffective. They keep applying old solutions to new problems, wondering why their previously successful methods no longer work. The most successful adapters I observed shared certain characteristics. They maintained extensive networks that kept them informed about changing conditions. They experimented with new approaches on a small scale before committing fully. They were willing to abandon methods that were no longer working, even if those methods had brought them previous success. But adaptation must be strategic rather than random. Every change should serve a purpose, improving your position under new circumstances, protecting essential interests, or taking advantage of new opportunities. People who change constantly without clear reasons appear unstable and unreliable. The goal is thoughtful evolution, not chaotic transformation. Maintain your core competencies while developing new ones. The capabilities that brought you to your current position probably have ongoing value, but they may not be sufficient for future challenges. Add new skills and resources without abandoning everything that makes you valuable. This creates resilience if one approach fails. You have alternatives. I observed this principle in the career of Francesco Sforza, who began as a condottiere, became Duke of Milan through marriage and military skill, then transformed himself into a diplomatic leader who maintained power through alliances rather than conquest. He adapted his methods to changing circumstances while maintaining his goal of controlling Milan. Learn to recognize when adaptation is necessary. Warning signs include declining effectiveness of your usual methods, changes in the competitive landscape that favor different approaches, shifts in what others value or reward, and new technologies or circumstances that make old approaches obsolete. The earlier you recognize these signals, the more time you have to adapt gracefully. Sometimes adaptation requires abandoning positions or relationships that have become liabilities. This is painful because it means admitting that investments you made in the past are no longer serving your interests. But clinging to sunk costs rather than cutting losses often turns temporary setbacks into permanent failures. The most sophisticated form of adaptation is anticipating changes before they fully manifest and positioning yourself to benefit from them rather than merely surviving them. This requires understanding the forces that drive change in your environment and making educated guesses about their future direction. However, never adapt so completely that you lose your essential identity or core competencies. The goal is evolution, not transformation into something entirely different. People should still recognize you as fundamentally the same person. Even if your methods and circumstances have changed dramatically, master this principle. Remain flexible in your methods while staying committed to your fundamental objectives. Change what isn't working, preserve what is, and always be ready to evolve when circumstances demand it. But never lose sight of who you are and what you're ultimately trying to achieve. Now comes the moment of synthesis, where all these principles must be woven together into your personal strategy for transformation. You cannot simply add these concepts to your existing approach like spices to a bland meal. True transformation requires fundamental changes in how you think about power, relationships, and your place in the world. This process is uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but absolutely necessary. The first step is honest self-assessment. Where are you weak when you should be strong? Where are you predictable when you should be strategic? Where are you trusting when you should be cautious? Most people resist this evaluation because it forces them to confront uncomfortable truths about their current limitations. But you cannot fix problems you refuse to acknowledge. Begin by identifying the specific situations where your current approach consistently fails to produce the results you want. These failures are not random, they represent systematic weaknesses in your strategy. Perhaps you're too direct when situations call for subtlety, too trusting when caution is warranted, or too patient when decisive action is required. Start implementing these principles gradually, rather than attempting dramatic overnight change. People around you have learned to expect certain behaviors from you, and sudden transformation will create suspicion and resistance. Instead, Gradually expand your repertoire of responses while maintaining enough consistency that others don't become alarmed by your evolution. Practice new behaviors in low-stake situations before deploying them. In critical moments, if you want to become more strategically unpredictable, experiment with varying your patterns in minor interactions before applying this principle to important relationships. If you want to become more comfortable with strategic severity, start by setting firmer boundaries in less significant situations. The most difficult aspect of this transformation is developing comfort with strategic ambiguity. Most people prefer clear, simple moral frameworks that tell them exactly how to behave in every situation. The principles I've shared require more sophisticated judgment, knowing when to be direct and when to be indirect, when to show mercy and when to be severe, when to trust and when to verify. This sophistication develops through practice and reflection. After each significant interaction or decision, analyze what worked and what didn't. Did you choose the right balance between force and cunning? Did you gather sufficient information before acting? Did you time your moves effectively? This ongoing analysis gradually builds the judgment necessary for strategic effectiveness. Expect resistance, both from others and from yourself. People around you may be uncomfortable with your growing strategic sophistication, especially if they've been accustomed to managing or predicting you. Your own conscience may struggle with approaches that seem less pure than your previous methods. This resistance is normal and temporary. Push through it rather than retreating to old patterns. Surround yourself with people who support your transformation rather than those who want you to remain weak and predictable. This may require changing some relationships or at least modifying how much influence certain people have over your decisions. People who benefit from your current limitations will actively resist your growth. Remember that becoming dangerous doesn't mean becoming evil. The goal is to develop capabilities that serve your legitimate interests and protect those you care about. The person who masters these principles becomes dangerous to their enemies, not to innocent people or genuine allies. You are developing strategic strength, not arbitrary cruelty. As you implement these changes, maintain connection to your core values while expanding your methods for expressing them. If you value justice, learn to pursue it more effectively rather than abandoning it entirely. If you value loyalty, become more strategic about earning and maintaining it rather than expecting it without cultivation. The transformation I'm describing takes time, usually months or years, rather than days or weeks. Be patient with yourself while remaining committed to growth. Each situation that challenges you becomes an opportunity to practice these principles and develop greater strategic sophistication. Monitor your progress through concrete results rather than comfortable feelings. Are you achieving your objectives more consistently? Are people treating you with greater respect? Are you better able to protect your interests and those of people you care about? These outcomes matter more than whether your new approaches feel natural or morally simple. Master this principle. Commit fully to becoming strategically formidable while maintaining your essential humanity. The world needs people who can be both effective and ethical, both powerful and principled. Your transformation serves not just your own interests, but everyone who depends on your success. As I near the end of our journey together, I want you to understand something crucial. The principles I've shared with you are not merely techniques for personal advancement. They are tools for creating lasting positive change in a world that often rewards weakness with exploitation and good intentions with failure. The person who masters strategic power bears a responsibility to use it wisely. Throughout my life, I watched genuinely good people fail to achieve their noble goals because they lacked the strategic sophistication to navigate hostile environments. They wanted to feed the poor but couldn't build sustainable institutions. They wanted to create justice but couldn't overcome entrenched interests. They wanted to protect the innocent but couldn't defeat those who preyed upon vulnerability. The tragedy wasn't their failure alone, it was the opportunity cost of their ineffectiveness. Every good person who remains powerless is a victory for those who use power badly. Every potential leader who stays weak is a gift to those who would exploit that weakness. Your transformation isn't just about your personal success. It's about ensuring that people with good intentions also possess the capability to implement them. When I wrote The Prince, many readers were shocked by its frank discussion of power's realities. They wanted to believe that the world operated according to higher principles, that virtue alone could triumph over vice, that good intentions were sufficient for good outcomes. 5 centuries later, the same naive thinking continues to handicap potentially effective leaders while empowering those who understand power's true nature. The principles I've taught youth, the balance of lion and fox, the strategic use of fear and love, the importance of timing and information, the art of calculated unpredictabilities, are not evil concepts. They are reality-based approaches to achieving objectives in a world where others are already using these methods, often for less noble purposes than yours. Consider the alternative: remaining strategically naive while your competitors become sophisticated, staying predictable while others master the art of tactical surprise, trusting blindly while others gather intelligence, showing mercy reflexively while others calculate the precise moment for severity. This isn't virtue, it's abdication of responsibility to those who depend on your success. But power without purpose is mere indulgence. As you develop these capabilities, remember what you wanted to accomplish before you understood how difficult accomplishment actually is. Whether your goals are personal advancement, family security, organizational improvement, or broader social change, let those objectives guide your application of strategic principles, rather than allowing the pursuit of power to become an end in itself. The most effective leaders I studied throughout history shared this combination: sophisticated understanding of power coupled with commitment to purposes larger than themselves. They became dangerous not to satisfy their egos, but to protect and advance things they cared about more than their own comfort or moral simplicity. Your legacy will be determined not just by what you achieve, but by how you achieve it and what you enable others to accomplish. The strategic sophistication you develop should create opportunities for others who share your values but lack your capabilities. The power you accumulate should serve purposes that outlast your own involvement. I have spent these pages teaching you to be strategically formidable because the world needs people who can be both effective and ethical. The choice isn't between being good and being strategically, between being strategically sophisticated or strategically naive. In a world where others have chosen sophistication, your naivety serves no one except those who would exploit it. As you implement these principles, remember that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction serves larger purposes and when mercy does. The most dangerous person is not the one who can cause the most damage, but the one who can choose precisely the right moment and method for any situation. You now possess knowledge that can transform your effectiveness in any competitive environment. Use it wisely, use it purposefully, use it in service of goals that justify the complexity and responsibility that strategic sophistication requires. The student who truly masters these lessons becomes a teacher for others who need the same transformation. Share this wisdom with those who can use it well, but guard it from those who would use it badly. The principles themselves are neutral. Their moral value depends entirely on the purposes they serve. Go forward and become dangerous. To those who would prevent you from achieving worthy goals, dangerous to those who exploit the weak, dangerous to those who mistake your previous kindness for permanent weakness, but remain safe for those who deserve your protection and partnership. This is my final gift to you, the understanding that strength and virtue can coexist, that effectiveness and ethics are not enemies, and that the world desperately needs people who can be both strategically sophisticated and morally grounded. Now go and make your mark upon the world.